Selamat
Nanti
pagi
ada
semua, salam sejahtera.
Selamat pagi. Nanti Fadel, nanti ada penerjemah dari Indonesia ke Inggris ya? Fadel?
Udah Mbak Yeni udah standby kayaknya.
Oh, sip.
Tapi ini apa namanya oleh host. Nah udah sekarang. Interpretation available, oke.
Bapak Ibu, mohon izin ada orang ADB mau masuk, kita masukin atau belum? Namanya Mbak.
Ya. Udah siap kan ya teman-teman semua? Ya.
Hello.
Oke, selamat pagi dan selamat datang kepada Bapak Ibu sekalian. Pertama-tama kami ucapkan kepada Bapak Ibu yang sudah menyempatkan waktu untuk datang dan bergabung pada kita hari ini. Kemudian saya ucapkan terima kasih yang sebesar-besarnya kepada Bapak Ibu dari Asian Development Bank atau ADB yang telah menerima audiensi kami, koalisi yang terdiri dari 40 organisasi penyandang disabilitas dari seluruh Indonesia dalam mengadvokasikan program perlindungan sosial bagi penyandang disabilitas di Indonesia. Sebelum acara kami mulai, ada beberapa hal teknis yang kami perlu sampaikan agar acara audiensi dapat berjalan dengan lancar. Yang pertama, panitia akan mematikan audio semua peserta untuk kelancaran acara hari ini. Yang kedua, panitia telah menyediakan JBI untuk kawan-kawan tuli. Yang ketiga, acara akan berlangsung dengan 2 bahasa, yakni bahasa Indonesia dan bahasa Inggris. Untuk kemudahan komunikasi, panitia telah menyediakan penerjemah yang akan mengalih bahasakan bahasa Inggris ke bahasa Indonesia dan sebaliknya. Mohon kepada Bapak Ibu yang ingin mengikuti diskusi dengan bahasa Indonesia, dapat memilih Indonesia dalam fitur Live Interpretation dengan simbol bola dunia. Jika Bapak Ibu mengaksesnya melalui laptop, simbol bola dunia terletak di antara fitur Record dan Reaction. Namun, jika Bapak Ibu mengakses aplikasi Zoom melalui HP, Bapak Ibu dapat menekan tombol titik 3 yang terletak di sebelah pojok kanan bawah. Kemudian pilih Language Interpretation, dan selanjutnya pilih Indonesia. Terima kasih. Selanjutnya saya persilahkan kepada Ibu Yeni Rosadamayanti, selaku Ketua Perhimpunan Jiwa Sehat, yang mengkoordinir penyusunan kertas kebijakan perlindungan sosial untuk penyandang disabilitas, untuk memberikan kata sambutan. Ibu Yeni Rosadamayanti, kami persilahkan waktu dan tempat.
Ya, Terima kasih kepada pertama-tama saya Yeni Rosa Damayanti, Ketua Perhimpunan Jiwa Sehat, mengucapkan terima kasih sebesar-besarnya kepada Asian Development Bank yang telah bersedia menerima kami untuk melakukan audiensi pada hari ini. Nah, sedikit pengantar. Semenjak COVID, kami penyandang disabilitas di Indonesia menyadari betapa pentingnya perlindungan sosial bagi penyandang disabilitas. Sebetulnya bukan hanya semenjak COVID, tapi semenjak waktu-waktu sebelumnya, perlindungan sosial adalah masalah besar bagi penyandang disabilitas penyandang disabilitas di Indonesia. Sampai saat ini memang tidak terlalu tampak adanya skema khusus perlindungan sosial bagi penyandang disabilitas di Indonesia. Sementara kami sangat tertinggal secara ekonomi, secara sosial, secara politik yang membutuhkan dukungan agar kami bisa mengejar ketertinggalan tersebut. Nah, pada saat kami menyusun kertas posisi ini yang sudah dimulai semenjak bulan Januari tahun 2021, kami melakukan penyusunan ini bersama-sama dengan 40 organisasi disabilitas dari seluruh Indonesia, dari Sumatera sampai Papua. Kami melakukan 3 kali webinar, 1 kali di Indonesia Barat, 1 kali di Indonesia bagian tengah, 1 kali di Indonesia bagian timur, untuk mensosialisasikan dan berbicara tentang pentingnya masalah social protection ini. Dan kami melakukan 4 kali FGD, untuk mengumpulkan masukan-masukan dari teman-teman. 1 di Sumatera, 1 di Jawa, 1 Indonesia bagian tengah, 1 bagian Indonesia bagian timur, untuk mengumpulkan masukan-masukan. Dan kami kemudian memilih tim perumus yang selama beberapa bulan bekerja keras untuk merumuskan apa-apa yang terkumpul sepanjang FGD, ditambah dengan beberapa survei yang kami lakukan, yang akhirnya kami berhasil menyelesaikan kertas posisi tentang skema perlindungan sosial bagi penyandang disabilitas. Kami sangat berharap bahwa upaya yang dilakukan bersama-sama 40 organisasi penyandang disabilitas dari seluruh Indonesia ini bisa menjadi bahan pertimbangan kebijakan Asian Development Bank ke depan. Nah, untuk itu terima kasih sekali lagi kepada Bapak-bapak dan Ibu-ibu dari Asian Development Bank. Ya, saya kembalikan kepada MC. Terima kasih banyak.
Baik, terima kasih banyak Ibu Yeni yang telah memberikan sambutannya. Selanjutnya kami akan memutarkan video mengenai summary isi kertas kebijakan perlindungan sosial bagi penyandang disabilitas.
Dignified social protections for persons with disabilities. What is the conditions of persons with disabilities in Indonesia? The National Team for Accelerated Poverty Reduction, or TNP2K, states that in Indonesia there are 22.22 million people with disabilities, or 9 out of 100 people in Indonesia are persons with disabilities. From the education perspective, based on the BPS study results on people's welfare indicators in 2020, opportunities for persons with disabilities compared to non-disabled people are as follows. For preschool education, it is 60% slower. For the elementary and junior high school education levels, or the 9-year compulsory education program, it is 8.5 times lower. While for senior high schools and vocational senior high school levels, it is 3.3 times lower. As a result, the percentage of non-disabled people who are high school graduates is 29.66%, while the percentage of people with disabilities who are elementary school drops out is 29.35%. In terms of employment opportunities among people with disabilities are 5.4 times lower. The National Employment Survey also confirmed that the labor force participation rate among persons with disabilities fell from 48.2% in 2016 to only 45.9% in 2019. Whereas among non-disabled people, participation increased from 68.7% to 70%. This condition shows that persons with disabilities in Indonesia are still relatively marginalized. Due to lack of education and employment opportunities, people with disabilities are significantly poorer than non-disabled people. To address this issue, an affirmative social protection system is needed. However, social protection for persons with disabilities is relatively minimal. It is estimated that only 5.5% of persons with disabilities have access to social protection programs. In Indonesia, there is only one program that directly targets persons with disabilities, namely Assistance Programs for Persons with Severe Disabilities, or ASPDB. The government hasn't considered the extra cost of disability a factor to determine the poverty line for families having family members with disabilities. So, only 1.07 million people with disabilities are recorded in the integrated social welfare data. As a result, in poor family-based social assistance programs, such as Family Hope Program, non-cash food relief, National Health Insurance or the Indonesian Health Card or JKN-KIS, and Smart Indonesia Program or PIP, the number of persons with disabilities as recipient is relatively low. Meanwhile, in terms of benefits, it is only Family Hope Program that provides an additional benefits of 200,000 rupiahs per month for families who have family members with disabilities. Unfortunately, this benefit is only enjoyed by around 102,000 persons with disabilities, or about 1% of the total 10 million Family Hope Program recipients. This situation is contrary to the government's vision to create inclusive development. The government has actively promoted policy changes for persons with disabilities, including ratifications of the Conventions on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2011 through Law No. 19 of 2011, National Regulatory Adjustment through Law No. 8 of 2016 on persons with disabilities, and during 2019 to 2020, the government issued 7 government regulations and 2 presidential regulations. However, some of these regulations are found not to be in line with the interests of persons with disabilities. These policy changes have not been optimally followed by the reform in the social protection system for persons with disabilities and are not followed with adequate budget support. How can persons with disabilities be self-reliant? Persons with disabilities will be able to enjoy inclusivity when the state, the communities, and their families provide adequate support to ensure that every person with disabilities has equal and decent access to employment, public housing, education, infrastructure, public facilities and transportation, as well as health services. In many countries, special social protection schemes for persons with disabilities have been established. In Singapore, services for persons with disabilities can be accessed in an integrated manner through Singapore Enable. In Australia, there is National Disability Insurance Services or NDIS. In Hong Kong and the United States, there are disability services. All of them can provide access to information, services, and registration either online through the website or a call center that can be contacted via telephone, as well as available disability services offices, plus a supporting community that helps persons with disabilities access information and services. Thus, all benefits of the programs for persons with disabilities can be well distributed to potential beneficiaries, and an easy access is facilitated. The programs offered by those countries may vary, but almost all of them cover various comprehensive aspects, ranging from access to employment, housing, education, health, concessions, cash transfer, assistive devices, and transportation. In Indonesia, a dignified social protection program for all persons with disabilities needs to be designed and introduced. This program consists of 3 sub-programs, namely Concession Program, Cash Transfer Program, and Direct Service Program for persons with disabilities. Concession Program. Concessions with fee exemptions or discounts for electricity rates, phone bills, internet, public transportations, house rent, clean water, land and building tax, motor vehicle tax, and others. Cash Transfer Program. The benefits of Cash Transfer Program can be distributed to 7 targets. Cash Transfer, direct disability benefit valid for life, distributed to all persons with disabilities to cover their additional living costs due to their disability condition or extra cost of disability. Care support and education fee support benefits. distributed to children with disabilities because children with disabilities have additional needs to accommodate their disabilities, including for transportation to school, therapy, medicines, stationaries, and so on. Unemployment benefit, distributed to adults with disabilities who are not yet working. Income benefits for adults with disability who work with low levels of income, or income below the amount equivalent to the district or city minimum wage. Benefits for working disabled women. Universal retirement benefit for the elderly with disabilities. Caregiver benefits is provided as an incentive to caregivers to take care of the people with severe disabilities or to reduce the burden on the family. Direct Service Program, BPJS Kesehatan or the National Health Insurance Program, and BPJS Ketenagakerjaan or National Employment Insurance Program, consulting, therapy, training services, fulfillment of assistive devices according to the medical needs and recommendation, mobility services, including subsidized motorbike modifications, pick-up and drop-off services to access health and school facilities, affirmative programs, housing access, priority to occupy subsidized and accessible public housing, because it has been very difficult for people with disabilities to get access to occupy public housing such as rusunawa or subsidized rental unit houses rented with priority to people with low incomes. Access to entrepreneurship support programs such as KUR or microcredit program, KUBE or joint business groups, and others. Personal assistance support. Impact of investment on persons with disabilities for the economy. The National Team for Accelerated Poverty Reduction or TNP2K stated that the support of social protection programs for the elderly and persons with disabilities, which amounts to 200 to 400,000 rupees per month, would be able to reduce the national poverty rate to 1 up until 1.3%. The World Bank in 2020 provides a more optimistic estimate, stating that if the coverage of the benefits provided reaches 70% of the populations of the elderly and persons with disabilities, the poverty rate will at least decrease by 32% from the existing condition, namely 9.7% to around 6.6% only. Social protection programs for persons with disabilities will also have an impact on families and communities. In a study conducted by AT Scale using the return of investment or ROI model, it is estimated that an investment of $1 billion through social and health program benefits, especially for the provisions of assistive devices, will be able to produce a productive economic impact during the period of use of the devices, namely amounting to $8,500 billion, and provide benefits to families amounting to $1,900 billion. So, over the next 55 years, it is predicted to produce a multiplier effect of $10 trillion. This study confirms that assistive devices is a relatively profitable investment both on the micro and macro scales. Through social protection programs for persons with disabilities, the government is promoting an inclusive economic growth while reducing household burdens for families having family members with disabilities and making them much more productive. In the future, persons with disabilities will no longer need to be seen as a burden to development. Instead, they will become active contributors to the national economy. Persons with disabilities are not burdens. They are a potential resource as long as the state is present to support them and their families and communities support them towards the realizations of an inclusive society. Persons with disabilities can do it. Let's work together.
Baik, Bapak Ibu, sebelum kita melanjutkan pada acara selanjutnya, ada baiknya kita melakukan sesi foto bersama dulu ya Bapak Ibu. Jadi dipersilahkan untuk menyalakan kameranya untuk sesi foto bersama. Baik, di sini tersedia 3 slide. Jadi senyumnya agak ditahan sebentar ya, karena banyak slide-nya. Oke. Apakah sudah siap? Coba saya lihat. Oke. Oke, sudah banyak yang menyalakan. Saya hitung ya Bapak Ibu. Oke, 1, 2, 3. Oke, untuk slide yang kedua. 1, 2, 3. Dan slide yang terakhir. 1, 2, 3. Oke. Terima kasih Bapak Ibu. Acara selanjutnya adalah diskusi yang akan dipandu oleh Ibu Cucu Saidah. Untuk Ibu Cucu Saidah, saya persilahkan. Terima kasih.
Baik, terima kasih Febri. Selamat pagi Bapak Ibu sekalian, senang sekali saya hari ini kembali menemani Bapak Ibu untuk hari ini berdiskusi bersama Bapak Ibu dari ASEAN Development Bank. Untuk prosesnya, saya akan menggunakan bahasa Indonesia, tetapi nanti kawan kita Uda Antoni akan menyampaikan di dalam bahasa Inggris. Jadi mohon pastikan bagi semua Bapak Ibu, baik itu dari ASEAN Development Bank, bahwa penerjemahannya berfungsi dengan baik. Sebaliknya juga bagi Bapak Ibu dari teman-teman organisasi penyandang disabilitas, penerjemahan dalam bahasa Indonesia juga berfungsi dengan baik, ya. Oke, Bapak Ibu, kita mulai saja untuk kita membahas atau menyampaikan tentang kertas kebijakan yang telah disusun sekian lama dan dilakukan oleh hampir seluruh perwakilan organisasi penyandang disabilitas dari berbagai wilayah yang tadi oleh Mbak Yeni sebutkan di awal, ya. Dan harapannya hari ini merupakan satu kesempatan untuk menyampaikan hasil kerja keras Bapak Ibu yang tertuang dalam kertas kebijakan ini, ya, ajuan kertas kebijakan yang di dalamnya terdapat banyak sekali informasi termasuk juga rekomendasi-rekomendasi yang mungkin juga dan kami sangat yakin juga akan bermanfaat banyak bagi Bapak Ibu di ASEAN Development Bank. Untuk itu saya akan mempersilahkan rekan saya Antoni untuk menyampaikan presentasi terlebih dahulu. Nanti setelah itu kita buka sesi tanya jawab. Silakan, udah Antoni.
Thank you very much, Kak Cucu. Ms. Aziza Sato and other representatives of Asian Development Bank and all audience. Over the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to, as a part of the policy paper development team, I'm going to briefly present a summary of our policy paper on social protection for people with disabilities, overcoming inequality to create independent living. This policy paper, as mentioned earlier, was co-developed and co-written by 40 disabled people's organizations across Indonesia. So the formulation processes involve like 120 people with disability, representing all types of disabilities from all parts of Indonesia in a series of activities such as webinars, focus group discussions, as well as having consultation with relevant experts and prominent disability activists. Probably you can go to slide 3 right away. Slide 3, yeah, thank you. People with disability in Indonesia, as we know it, are one of those frequently left behind in development. So data from Indonesian Central Bureau of Statistics indicate that the number of people with disability who can access various basic services is much lower than those without disability. The case is even worse for people with severe or multiple disabilities. For example, the inequality is seen in people with disabilities access to the 9-year compulsory education, which is 8.5 times lower, and the employment rate which is 5.4 times lower. The picture also looks grimmer for people with disability during the COVID-19 pandemic. They are the most vulnerable affected group. The findings of a study conducted by Indonesian DPO Network for Inclusive COVID-19 response demonstrate that 86% of working people with disability experience a decrease in income. About 45% of the respondents claim that they lost 50 to 80% of their income. So consequently, they were faced with a greater difficulty in making ends meet and paying the bills. Next slide. The existing social programs offered by the government are less accessible for people with disability. The findings from the focus group discussions that we organized with 40 disabled people's organizations throughout Indonesia reveal 7 barriers faced by people with disability in accessing the existing social protection programs. They are population administration and data registration issues, limited access to program information and program membership, prevailing stigma, indications of misuse or corruption by implementing agents in the field, and a mismatch of assistance and real needs. Furthermore, most of the existing social programs only target poor households in which the received benefits are minimal. So the benefits are given only to persons with disability registered as a family member, and the number of recipients is limited to 1 person for each household. So these existing programs are poverty threshold based, in which the targeted households are those belonging to 40% of households with the lowest welfare level. Next slide. Now, if we look at to what extent people with disability in Indonesia have been covered by the existing social protection programs, a study by Bappenas, or the Indonesian Ministry of National Development Planning, disclosed that only 5%, or about 1.7 million people with disability, are registered in the integrated social welfare data administered by Indonesian Ministry of Social Affairs. In addition to very limited coverage, the existing social protection programs do not consider extra costs of living with disability. A research by Prospera demonstrates that a household with a disabled family member has to incur over 19% extra cost, and this is even above the rate of the national minimum wage. The extra costs include, among other things, purchase of assistive devices, fees for personal assistance or attendant care, particularly for those with high support needs, and then transportation-related costs such as vehicle modification, use of spatial transport, and travel companion, fees for therapies as well as medical and non-medical consultations, fees for sign language interpreter, residential or house modification, assistive software related costs, and many others. And all those extra costs will inevitably increase the living costs of households with disabled family members. Next slide, please. All right, and our policy paper recommends that the Indonesian government design a comprehensive social protection program for people with disability consisting of concessions, cash transfers, and direct services. I think the earlier video has also shown this. Next slide. All right. Concession is intended to help with the extra cost of living with disability by reduction or exemption of costs for people with disability. So the concessions may include various public services and life necessities such as transportation, utilities like electricity and water, house rent, telephone and internet bills, or tickets to recreational sites, food and entertainment, and many others. Tax reduction for motor vehicles, properties, and imported assistive devices and medicines should count as important concession as well. Next slide. Cash transfer programs relate to direct benefits to persons with disability and incentives for caregivers or personal assistance subsidies. So it is like a lifetime disability direct allowance. All people with disability are entitled to direct benefit in the form of cash allowance. However, the amount received by people with severe disability or those with high and complex support needs should be greater than that of people with less severe impairments to meet their higher extra costs. And for those with more profound disability and are unable to work, the amount received should not only help with the extra costs, but also their daily living needs. And the caregiver allowance is intended to recompense the caregivers' loss of opportunity to engage in productive activities due to providing 24-hour care for their disabled family members. Next slide. Direct services are those provided by relevant ministries in the form of affirmation programs and policies. For example, Ministry of Health can ensure provision of high quality assistive devices that meet the real needs of people with disability. And this kind of affirmation programs can be funded through a sort of synergy among stakeholders, including local governments, healthcare, and social security agencies or BPJS, private sector, and others. Ministry of Social Affairs can as well provide services of personal assistant, attendant care, respite care, or other similar care services. And an example of affirmation program by the Ministry of Public Works and Ministry of Finance can be in the form of subsidized public housing loans for people with disability, provision of community-based housing with state-paid services and assistance from social workers, and incentives for house modification for families with disabled members. Next slide. Last but not least, ensuring a comprehensive social protection program for people with disability will also require implementation of strategic related policies. So, for example, realization of disability cards issuance across the country that will entitle the card holders their right to access social protection programs to be the priority policy. And it is also important to build a kind of integrated service center for persons with disability in each district or city. So these organizations will serve as a center for services and coordination related to the handling of disability issues. Next slide. Well, yeah, I think that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much. Over to Cicu.
Baik, terima kasih Pak Antoni atas penyampaiannya. Bapak Ibu, seperti tadi yang sudah kita simak bahwa ini merupakan atau kertas kebijakan yang dibuat oleh teman-teman dari organisasi penyandang disabilitas dari berbagai wilayah ini benar-benar adalah suara dari teman-teman penyandang disabilitas ya, di mana tidak hanya dari satu daerah saja, tapi dari keterlibatan teman-teman di daerah juga. Dan ini merupakan salah satu wujud dari prinsip bahwa bagaimana suara penyandang disabilitas itu menjadi atau penyandang disabilitas itu menjadi aktor utama dalam kerja-kerja disability inklusif ini, ya. Baik, kita masih punya cukup waktu. Saya buka saja dulu untuk sesi pertanyaan. Jika ada yang ingin bertanya, silahkan boleh raise hand atau boleh tulis di chat box terlebih dahulu. Silahkan. Boleh dalam bahasa Inggris untuk Bapak Ibu dari Asian Development Bank atau dari teman-teman disabilitas, juga boleh dalam bahasa Indonesia karena kita didukung oleh dua penerjemah dalam bahasa Inggris dan bahasa Indonesia. Silahkan. Ada yang ingin bertanya terlebih dahulu atau memberikan tanggapan? Silahkan. Dari from Ibu Azusa, sorry, I didn't mean to spot you on. Dari Asian Development Bank.
Hello there.
Yes.
Hi. Thank you so much to the full team that's on this Zoom for an excellent presentation and a very informative video. If you don't mind, I'd just like to take a couple of minutes to introduce myself and the team that's here from ADB. My name is Azusa Sato. I am currently in the United States, but normally I'm based in Indonesia. And I work on social sector issues, including issues that you have raised today, but mostly with the Ministry of Social Affairs and with Bappenas, as well as the Ministry of Health. I'm joined here today by a couple of colleagues, Meredith Wise. She works particularly on these issues and her specialty is in older people care and long-term care, but her group has also been working on people with disabilities, working with people with disabilities as well. I think my colleague Wendy is also online. Wendy is the chief of the social development group at ADB, and this covers a lot of the knowledge work. This group covers a lot of the knowledge work that ADB produces. And then I have a couple of colleagues based in Indonesia, Ibu Dini, as well as Pachai, here as well. So we're very pleased to meet you and thank you so much for your presentation. Just to say very quickly, is ramping up in terms of the support for human capital development. So obviously with President Jokowi's vision for developing the human capital of the citizens of Indonesia, we stand to support all sorts of different people and people with vulnerabilities particularly. As a bank, our focus is particularly on the poor, those with disabilities, those who are older, women, and in many circumstances, these groups overlap. It tends to be that if you're old, if you're poor, you could be old, you could also be disabled, and so on. So by all means, we don't have a special categorization, but we do like to support vulnerable people as a bank. In Indonesia particularly, we've been working on issues such as stunting, the primary health care, nutrition. This will be with the Ministry of Health. With the Ministry of Social Affairs, we've been supporting the PKH program, which was mentioned in your video, as well as Sembako food program. And then with Bappenas, particularly on aging and long-term care. We also do have colleagues working in education and TVET issues, which were also mentioned in your video. If at this point we may just have a couple more minutes, I'd like to ask if maybe Wendy and Meredith may like to say a few words on the specific work they've been doing with PWD. This is really their area of expertise, whereas I'm more of a generalist. So maybe I could hand the floor to Wendy, if that's okay, followed by Meredith.
Thank you, Asuza. Maybe I'll just give a little bit of a big picture about what ADB is doing on disability inclusion, and then also older persons, and then I'll let Meredith talk specifically about the work that we're doing in the region and in Indonesia. So in terms of disability inclusion, we have recently in December released a new strategic roadmap on disability inclusion for ADB. It calls for actions across our entire institution. and has built a lot of commitment on the inside. From the social development thematic group, we're leading a series of different work with the education group on inclusive education, with the urban sector group on inclusive design in the built environment. We have this wide body of work on aging and long-term care. And then we're also starting to look in the area of assistive technology. I think that we have a growing examples and portfolio of projects which include disability inclusion. In Mongolia is our very first fully focused disability inclusion project. It's a large project which looks at disability across the life cycle, starting from the point of early childhood identification and the development of service and support services, support centers that provide services for people with disabilities. As I said, from childhood all the way through up to employment services and training and skills development. There are a wide range of other projects which are ongoing also. Over the last few years, maybe about 8 years, we have built up a body of work on long-term care and aging societies. And we've conducted research in several different countries. Indonesia is one of them, looking at developing strategic planning on the topic of long-term care development. In the case of Indonesia, tied also to the link to the Stranas document, and undertaken country diagnostic studies. In China is where we have been building a big portfolio of aged care projects. These cover everything from a focus on home, community, and residential care services to policy development, to also a new type of project which is beginning to come on board, which is a healthy and age-friendly city development. We're trying to build up the knowledge base in this area to share examples across countries. We have several other types of projects emerging in other countries in this vein. And finally, just to introduce Meredith, we are undertaking right now pilots on community-based care services in 4 different countries, and Indonesia is one of them. And I'll let Meredith talk about some of the relationships that she sees with the work that you have been presenting today and what's happening in those initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Yes, so thank you. My name is Meredith Wise. I work with Wendy and Azusa, and as Azusa mentioned, I have a strong interest in working in aging and care and support. So as Wendy highlighted, and I've just shared in the chat, ADB has just recently published its first roadmap on disability inclusion. So really highlighting the institution's commitment to this. Some of the key characteristics and sort of ways of working, priorities in this roadmap, as Wendy has highlighted, is really working with all of ADB's sectors to improve disability inclusion. And one internal process that we have started with this is really to, measure our own work in terms of disability inclusion, and we're rolling that out throughout the institution. The second one was absolutely key is partnerships, and it's fantastic to see such a wide network of organizations here today. I see you've been collaborating with CBM. CBM have also been helping ADB itself and providing capacity building to us to improve our disability inclusion. And we also work with organizations such as, similar on the assistive technology and so forth. So we really hope that we can continue this partnerships and dialogues, as well as that is a key component of how we can become more responsive. key other components of the roadmap is really, as you've been highlighted, really on data and data disaggregation, ensuring that. And then the final component is to make sure that to strengthen ADB's own disability inclusion standards in its workplace policies and practice. Just related to the social protection, thank you so much for the video and the report. Both really, really informative. And I'd also seen the Prospera study recently on the additional costs of disability, which is really, really insightful. So I hope we can get all of those shared. As Wendy says, you know, in Indonesia, we've been working closely in partnership with Bappenas, but obviously, of course, with MOSA and MOH and other ministries on really looking at community-based services, specifically for older people, both in Jogja and Bali, with many of the same sort of really looking quite similar to the direct service program that you highlighted. So again, that evidence that you've developed into that direct service program with those recommendations is really, really helpful for us to strengthen that work. In other countries, again, we're working more like in terms of the cash transfers. We're looking at exploring support to caregivers allowances, support to the 80. So again, the evidence that you provide is really, really helpful for us to take this forward as well. Just the last thing I would like to highlight in terms of data related to social protection, every 2 or 3 years, ADB does collect social protection cost expenditure from across all the regions. This is developed into our social protection indicator. And this year there's been a very specific focus for the first time in really collecting data on social protection expenditure with disabilities. And so there is a that will be out soon, so it's included in the main index for the first time, and there will be a specific briefing and further in-depth analysis on what the social protection expenditure on persons with disabilities and for persons and inclusive persons with disabilities is. So I hope that will also be useful for you from a comparative purpose as well. Thank you. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Baik, oke. Terima kasih banyak Bapak Ibu dari ibu-ibu ya tadi dari Asian Development Bank tadi yang sudah menyampaikan beberapa program-program yang dilaksanakan oleh Asian Development Bank baik itu di Indonesia maupun di negara Asia lainnya. Yang salah satunya juga adalah terkait dengan social protection atau perlindungan sosial ini. Saya kira kita masih punya 14 menit, mungkin dibuka saja langsung dengan pertanyaan atau ya jika terutama dari Ibu Azusa dan rekan-rekan di ADB, kalau ada pertanyaan silakan. Any question? Ibu Azusa or Ibu Meredith or Ibu Wendy atau dari rekan-rekan yang lain? Boleh. Ibu Yeni silakan menulis di chat box, silakan ingin bertanya pada ADB. To the point, Bu. Silakan, Bu.
Ya, terima kasih kepada Ibu Meredith dan teman-teman dari Asia Development Bank. Sangat menarik mendengar beberapa program-program yang sudah dilakukan oleh ADB terkait dengan disabilitas di beberapa negara. Pertanyaan saya, apakah untuk program-program terkait dengan penyandang disabilitas, terutama yang terkait dengan social protection, apakah selama ini Asian Development Bank sudah melakukan kerjasama atau dialog atau konsultasi dengan organisasi-organisasi penyandang disabilitas di Indonesia. Kalau misalnya belum, itu kami tentunya akan sangat senang untuk kedepannya kita melakukan dialog dan konsultasi secara intensif terkait masalah ini.
Baik, terima kasih Bu Yeni. Ini diajukan ke ADB, jadi sekaligus ini Ibu Meredith mau bertanya atau mau ini silahkan, mungkin bisa langsung dijawab Ibu. Silakan Bu Meredith. Meredith, yeah, sorry.
I'll let Azusa answer that question directly, but what we have done, we do have sort of an Asia Pacific Social Protection conference, which is a very large conference, and our keynote conference on social protection. And last time there was a regional delegation of organizations with persons with disabilities who attended that conference. It was extremely powerful to sort of really raise these issues for all of these regional stakeholders. So at the regional level, yes, there has been dialogue, but I'll let Azusa answer the question on the country dialogue. But I did have a question, and I'd like to take the opportunity to answer the question. You highlighted, the assistive technology, and you highlighted that, in your proposals, you would like to see sort of improvements in access and financial support to assistive technology. Has there been much policy development in Indonesia on this? We hear there might be some movement, but I'm not quite sure what the current situation is. So that's my question back. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. Uda Anthony or any others would like to, kenapa saya jadi bahasa Inggris ya? Apakah ada yang ingin merespon? Apakah sudah ada policy atau kebijakan yang terkait dengan asistif teknologi tadi? Dan satu lagi terkait dengan, tadi maaf satu lagi saya agak miss. Could you repeat Ibu Meredith, the other one? Assistive technology and, sorry.
There was only one question from me, which
is
the progress on access to AT, any policy progress.
Oke, ya. Baik, ada yang ingin berbagi apakah ada kebijakan terkait dengan persediaan atau tentang asistif teknologi ya di Indonesia ini. Udah Anthony atau Mbak Dwi atau Mbak Yeni, apakah ada yang tahu atau ada teman-teman yang lain?
Ya, Cucu, ya. Mungkin saya respon dalam bahasa Indonesia aja ya, karena tadi presentasinya dalam bahasa Inggris supaya fair gitu ya. Sependek pengetahuan saya untuk kebijakan yang berkaitan dengan assistive technology sepertinya belum ada ya, tapi lebih kita ke kebijakan untuk pemberian alat bantu, dan ini menjadi salah satu program rehabilitasi Kementerian Sosial dan juga Dinas Sosial di daerah begitu ya. Dan sekarang ini sepertinya Kementerian Sosial lebih memberdayakan dan lebih memfungsikan balai-balai gitu ya di seluruh Indonesia untuk kemudian melakukan asesmen, kemudian juga penyediaan alat bantu yang dibutuhkan oleh penyandang disabilitas begitu. Nah, namun memang fakta yang ada di lapangan ya, mungkin juga teman-teman semua yang hadir di sini juga sudah mengalami juga bahwa memang kebanyakan alat bantu itu cenderung tidak sesuai dengan kebutuhan real ya penyandang disabilitas gitu ya. Ya memang ada beberapa yang beberapa balai yang melakukan asesmen, ada occupational terapisnya gitu ya, tapi kebanyakan di daerah. Nah, bentuk alat bantunya itu seragam gitu ya, artinya belum mempertimbangkan apa sih yang menjadi kebutuhan. Nah, misalnya saja yang pengguna kursi roda itu kan juga beragam kebutuhannya ya. Jadi kebanyakan kursi roda yang dibagikan itu ya kayak hospital wheelchair itu ya, bukan adaptive wheelchair ya, karena adaptive wheelchair yang mungkin dari sisi aspek biayanya mungkin lebih mahal gitu ya, mungkin itu juga jadi kendala ya bagi Kementerian Sosial dan juga dinas sosial di daerah. Mungkin nanti teman-teman lain seperti Mbak Dwi atau yang lainnya bisa memberikan tambahan. Terima kasih.
Mungkin
Baik,
bisa
terima
kasih tambahan sedikit ya, Cucu ya.
So,
Yeah, so Meredith, the policy regarding assistive device in Indonesia is not yet a policy that guaranteed regular, provision of assistive technology for person with disabilities in Indonesia. So, it is not yet a right. It is more like an aid. So something like the Ministry of Social Affairs gives some charity to person with disabilities in forms of some assistive device. That's the first one. This is not a regular program and not yet involved in the social protection scheme. So this is what this is one of our main recommendation, that assistive technology and assistive device must be part of the insurance, of the health insurance, the BPJS in Indonesia. Is not yet so. So this is one of the most important part of our recommendation to Indonesian government, and hopefully ADB can also endorse this.
Boleh
baik, terima
ikut
kasih.
nambah?
Silakan Mbak Lani.
Ya, barangkali urun saran saja, karena sebenarnya cukup banyak potensial support dari kebijakan yang sudah ada, seperti PP tentang akomodasi yang layak di dalam ketenagakerjaan dan pendidikan ya. Di sana banyak sekali peluang untuk jika misalkan ADB ingin mencoba melakukan kajian terkait dengan assistive technology. Karena terus terang saja sebenarnya ini kan assistive technology adalah salah satu prioritas atau potensi yang tinggi untuk membantu akomodasi yang layak bagi penyandang disabilitas. Oleh karena itu akan baik sekali misalkan nanti di kemudian hari ADB juga bisa membantu teman-teman koalisi ini dalam mencoba mengeksplor tentang assistive technology berbasis dari akomodasi yang layak di PP Pendidikan dan Ketenagakerjaan. Saya rasa itu ya. Terima kasih.
Baik, terima kasih. Silakan ada Pak Cahyadi dan Mbak Dwi, mana yang duluan ini?
Tadi Mbak
Pak
Dwi
Cahyadi
duluan.
dulu mungkin ya Mbak Dwi ya.
Oh, tadi Mbak
Sebentar.
Dwi duluan yang angkat
Ya.
tangan, silakan.
Oh, Mbak Dwi duluan, silakan. Oke, baik.
Terima kasih Pak Cahyadi. Iya, hanya menambahkan Teh Cucu, kalau di BPJS Kesehatan kalau tidak salah memang sudah ada ya beberapa alat bantu yang di-cover oleh BPJS Kesehatan, tetapi itu belum semua dan masih sangat terbatas untuk alat bantu tertentu saja yang di-cover. Nah, kemudian juga terkait tadi melanjutkan yang disampaikan oleh Bu Lani terkait dengan ketenagakerjaan, ini juga saya belum melihat apakah di BPJS Ketenagakerjaan juga sudah meng-cover tentang adanya alat bantu. Jadi misalnya teman-teman disabilitas yang bekerja tapi kemudian terjadi sesuatu dan disabilitasnya bertambah misalnya dan butuh alat bantu, atau untuk mendukung akomodasi yang layak dalam pekerjaannya, itu juga belum ada peraturan yang mendukung adanya alat bantu ini. Kemudian juga tadi hal lain juga masih tingginya ya pajak untuk masuknya alat-alat bantu dari luar negeri, dan ini mungkin perlu sekali kebijakan di tingkat nasional yang menyeluruh ya, sehingga ketika kita atau rekan-rekan disabilitas itu membeli alat bantu dari luar itu jelas gitu prosesnya, prosedurnya dan pajaknya gitu, dan juga ada keringanan pajak untuk ini gitu. Itu Teh Cucu tambahannya. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Mbak Dwi. Silakan Pak Cahyadi.
Terima kasih Ibu Cucu dan terima kasih teman-teman dan Bapak Ibu atas presentasinya yang saya rasa sangat membuka mata kami ya mengenai data-data yang terbaru. Saya hendak share saja, tapi agak berbeda dengan topik yang mungkin sudah baru saja dibahas, yaitu bahwa tadi sudah secara implisit mungkin Azuza sudah menyebutkan bahwa kegiatan ADB di mana-mana termasuk di Indonesia itu selalu dipandu dan selalu berpegang kepada apa yang kami sebut sebagai Safeguard Policy Statement atau pernyataan kebijakan perlindungan SPS ya singkatannya. Mungkin teman-teman di sini saya rasa sudah banyak yang tahu dan meneliti dokumen itu, tapi itu esensinya adalah upaya kami untuk memberikan perlindungan terhadap komponen-komponen yang dianggap rentan, termasuk terkait lingkungan maupun pemukiman kembali secara tidak sukarela, masyarakat adat dan juga kelompok rentan, termasuk di dalamnya adalah teman-teman disabilitas di situ. Nah, kebetulan sekali saat ini ADB sedang melakukan tinjauan ulang atau review ya terhadap SPS ini, terhadap policy ini, dan tujuannya adalah bagaimana agar SPS ini tetap updated ya dengan perkembangan situasi saat ini, dan sebagai informasi SPS terakhir adalah diupdate tahun 2009. Jadi sekarang sudah waktunya untuk mengupdate lagi dan untuk dapat menangkap perkembangan terbaru di masyarakat dan juga kajian-kajian terbaru seperti yang tadi sudah dipresentasikan ini begitu. Jadi saya rasa ini sebenarnya masukan yang sangat baik sekali, dan kalau boleh saya juga memanfaatkan forum ini untuk mengundang teman-teman di sini untuk dapat nanti mungkin hadir di salah satu sesi konsultasi untuk SPS ini yang akan diadakan ADB mungkin pertengahan tahun ini. Nanti mungkin undangannya akan saya kirimkan kepada saya rasa ada emailnya itu ya. Jadi supaya teman-teman juga bisa hadir dan dapat menyuarakan concern dari temuan terbaru ini, dan apakah misalnya policy ADB sudah mencantumkan hal-hal yang memang menjadi fokus bagi teman-teman. Saya rasa begitu saja Bu Cucu. Terima kasih.
Baik, terima kasih Pak Cahyadi, informasi yang sangat baik sekali, dan teman-teman dicatat ya, nanti pertengahan Juni akan ada review policy SPS dari ADB ya. Ini penting sekali bagi teman-teman untuk
pertengahan tahun.
Nanti bisa...
Kami belum
pertengahan tahun.
Pertengahan tahun, tapi antara Juli sampai Agustus mungkin, antara periode itu. Yeah.
Oke, ya Juli sampai Agustus nanti. Pak Cahyadi juga jangan lupa untuk mengundang kawan-kawan ya nanti.
Tentunya. Terima kasih.
Kalau sudah ada waktunya yang pasti.
Yeah.
Oke, baik teman-teman, ini sudah jam 11 karena dari pihak ADB mengalokasikan hanya 1 jam. Hanya 1 jam, jadi saya kira mungkin kecuali kalau masih ada yang ingin stay gitu untuk 1 atau 2 pertanyaan gitu, atau mau kita selesaikan saja di jam 11. Bapak Ibu dari ADB, monggo. We finish at 11, okay? Oh, tapi kalau boleh, ini ada satu pertanyaan yang menanyakan.
I think Azusa has had to leave. But yes, I'm happy. It would have been good to have much more time to have this discussion. I'm happy for maybe a couple of more minutes, but then yes, we might have to wrap up and as just reconvene back in June. Yes, as has been mentioned, that would be very useful. Okay, thanks. Baik, hanya ada satu pertanyaan saja tentang program dukungan ADB terkait dengan COVID-19, mungkin recovery dari COVID ini ya, dan ini apakah ada spesifik gitu ya, atau sudah mempertimbangkan inklusi disabilitas jika masih ada. Kemudian ada pertanyaan sebetulnya tentang bagaimana ADB memastikan keterlibatan penyandang disabilitas di dalam konteks di Indonesia, gitu. Di dalam program-programnya, mulai dari perencanaan sampai dengan pada implementasi dan mungkin evaluasinya. Silahkan, 2 itu saja. Okay, thank you for the questions. I have just answered an earlier question in the chat regarding projects to support empowerment and employment with people with disabilities. My understanding, we don't currently have any projects in Indonesia, but this is something that we do have in other countries, such as in Mongolia. Unfortunately, on those specific questions, they're very good questions on the COVID, disability inclusiveness, and the processes. Obviously in ADB's processes and in the new roadmap that's been highlighted, the engagement and consultation with persons with disabilities has been highlighted, as I mentioned, in our indicator now to measure how inclusive our projects are. This is a key indicator, that consultation with organizations and persons affected, with people with disabilities. It really is highly encouraged. In terms of the specific practicalities in Indonesia, Azusa would be the best person to answer those. And so what I would suggest is if we can record those questions, and then she can respond more fully to give the most accurate information to you.
Can I just add, Meredith, on the side of specifically the ADB response and disability inclusion? ADB provided, we had a specific type of funding which we provided to countries for the COVID response, and that was budget support directly to ministries of finance and governments. And we had certain areas where we were supporting. One was in terms of health and health response. The second pillar was on social protection, and the third pillar was on small and medium enterprise support, that type of thing. So underneath the social protection support, which I think went out to over 40 some countries, the majority of that support was then used by governments to really help to fund the social assistance response in countries, and much of that pulled on trying to build off of and improve coverage and provide benefits through existing social protection systems. I know that in some of the countries, and I don't have it off the top of my head, there were explicit mentions of people with disabilities to be able to be the target of those benefits. I think if we reconvene in June, we can do a little bit of study on our side to be able to come back with a more thorough answer, but definitely in most countries, the bulk of the social protection support went to social assistance, and within that, in some countries, I know that there was explicit mention of it going to also to help to support people with disabilities. Thanks.
Oke, terima kasih. Saya kira kita sudah 6 menit lebih dari waktunya. Kalau masih ada satu lagi aja, tapi kalau tidak mungkin kita selesai. Ada teman-teman yang ingin menanggapi atau bertanya satu lagi aja, satu pertanyaan?
Izin menambahkan Bu Cucu, tadi saya sudah tinggalkan di chat box alamat email saya. Seperti tadi Meredith sudah sampaikan, bila ada pertanyaan khusus tentang Indonesia misalnya bisa di-emailkan kepada Azusa melalui saya. Alamat emailnya tadi saya tulis di chat box. Terima kasih Bapak Ibu.
Baik, terima kasih Pak Cahyadi. Bapak Ibu hanya satu lagi, setelah itu kita tutup. Oke. Oh, Ibu Ulya, silahkan. To the point ya Bu, silahkan.
Sudah
Suaranya nggak jelas, Bu.
Sudah ditulis di chat.
Oh, oke, baik.
Di kolom chat.
Ya, sebentar. Oh, kota layak huni. Tentang kota layak huni ya. Ini maksud barangkali ada bisa lebih jelas lagi apa yang dimaksud Bu Ulya tentang tindak lanjut kota layak huni ini, atau mungkin sesuatu yang berbeda ya? Ibu Ulia, maaf ini mungkin sesuatu yang berbeda mungkin ya, karena kita spesifik membahas tentang perlindungan sosial, sementara pertanyaannya tentang tindak lanjut kota layak huni. Jadi mungkin ini sedikit berbeda, dan kalau ada pertanyaan barangkali nanti bisa disampaikan lewat email ke Pak Cahyadi tadi ya, kalau ini lebih spesifik di hal lainnya. Oke. Tentang kelanjutan program ADB di Kota Cirebon. Mungkin bisa lewat email ke Pak Cahyadi aja ya. Gitu ya. Nanti bisa difasilitasi oleh Mas Tito gitu. Gitu ya. Oke. Baik Bapak Ibu, rupanya kita sudah sudah waktunya untuk menutup karena mungkin yang lain juga ada kepentingan. Saya hanya ingin menggarisbawahi aja atau menekankan kembali dari pertemuan kita hari ini bahwa pertama tentu saja ucapan terima kasih sebesar-besarnya bagi Bapak Ibu dari organisasi penyandang disabilitas, kemudian juga Asian Development Bank yang hari ini kita dapat berdiskusi bertemu ya. Akhirnya kita saling tahu, setidaknya minimal saling kenal dulu di awal ya, bahwa apa yang dilakukan oleh ADB barangkali bisa diketahui, dan setelah ini harapannya adalah ada tindak lanjut untuk pertemuan-pertemuan yang untuk memastikan agar apapun program yang dilakukan oleh ADB bersama pemerintah Indonesia adalah memastikan keterlibatan penyandang disabilitas, kemudian adalah memastikan bahwa inklusi disabilitas itu bisa benar-benar terimplementasikan, dan keterlibatan penyandang disabilitas atau organisasi disabilitas tidak hanya pada konsultasi di awal saja, tetapi di dalam berbagai tahapan agar memastikan program apapun yang dilaksanakan bersama pemerintah Indonesia adalah benar-benar sesuai dengan kebutuhan ya. Jadi salah satunya tadi soal assistive device nih, atau bagaimana memastikan bahwa kita ada sedikit reformasi ya tentang tentang kebijakan dari assistive teknologi gitu, atau assistive device-nya itu sendiri gitu ya. Tidak hanya mendapat one fit size all gitu, atau satu solusi untuk semua, karena disabilitas itu beragam. Jadi itu saja intinya. Sekali lagi terima kasih banyak. Mohon maaf kalau ada salah-salah kata, dan kita catat nanti pertengahan tahun ini untuk bisa kembali berdiskusi, tapi harapannya sebelum itu atau setelah ini juga Bapak Ibu dari ADB maupun organisasi penyandang disabilitas kembali bertemu untuk memastikan inklusi disabilitas ini di lingkup program ADB kerjasama dengan pemerintah Indonesia. Oke, saya tutup saja. Terima kasih banyak dan selamat siang. Sampai jumpa lain waktu kembali beraktivitas. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih semua Bapak Ibu.